Working in partnership with different organizations and different countries really strengthens the possibility to achieve conservation outcomes, because the role of forests to produce oxygen, to manage energy cycles and water cycles affects us all. I'm Sonia Kleindorfer. I'm Professor of Animal Behavior. The Queen's Commonwealth Canopy project is a project that brings together forests and people interested in conservation from across the Commonwealth countries. So it's an international support group for forest conservation.
The Queen's Commonwealth Canopy project, I see it as it's a very good initiative, very fascinating, and it's one of, I think, probably one of the best initiatives that the Commonwealth has come up with to do with conservation. I am Alivereti Naikatini. I am from the Fiji Islands, and I am currently doing my PhD, looking at the foraging behavior, foraging patterns of some of Fiji's woodland or forest bird species. And Fiji, being a small island country located in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, I see this initiative, this project, as a good way of networking and working with the other 54 member countries of the Commonwealth to deal with the protection of forests, raising awareness of the conservation and the importance of indigenous forests.
It's the Queen's Commonwealth Canopy, but that's too long to talk about, so we call it the QCC. It was started in 2015 by a Member of Parliament who thought it was a good idea and suggested it to CHOGM. I'm Libby Ellis, and I'm the current President of the South Australian branch of the Royal Commonwealth Society and the Regional Coordinator for Australia. The Royal Commonwealth Society is actually 150 years old. It was started in 1858 and it was the colonial society in those days. 2 years ago, when we had an excuse to celebrate 150 years, we met Sonia Kleindorfer at a function for the Queen's birthday, and we got talking and we had some interests in common, and so that was how we became involved with the QCC.
The birds, 60 species of birds, again 50% are endemic and only found in Fiji. The two birds that you see up here, we are two of our endemic.
I thought it was great because while I'm on the committee at the Royal Commonwealth Society, it was interesting to hear straight from Alivereti exactly what he does and how much effect our grant has had on him and his ability to complete his studies. It's exactly part of what the Royal Commonwealth Society should be doing, because if we don't all try and save the world, I don't know what future generations are going to have.
I became involved in 2016 when I was looking for opportunities for students, undergraduate and postgraduate, to become part of a global network for conservation outcomes. I think one can get very frustrated as a lone individual in the face of all of the habitat loss and climate change impacts to the world, and it's good to link people up because together we can move mountains.
With the support from the Royal Commonwealth Society of South Australia, I was able to come across to Australia to meet my two external supervisors to discuss my research, and most importantly to discuss the data that has been collected. And through the Royal Society of South Australia, I've been involved in doing some work actually in the Queen's Commonwealth Canopy site in Fiji and in South Australia. Fiji might do it on a country level, but it's only one country. But if it networks with these 50 plus other countries, it'll be a very big contribution towards conservation.
So what we did was to find a partnership across the Pacific in Fiji between Australia and Fiji to create learning opportunity and conservation opportunity for students. We worked with University of South Pacific and Nature Fiji and several universities in South Australia. Flinders University was the lead organisation, partnered with UniSA and University of Adelaide. We had hundreds of students going over to Fiji and working with students together from University of South Pacific, mentored by Nature Fiji. It was wonderful.
So for my research, I'm trying to gain some more information or knowledge on how the birds in Fiji have evolved, their evolution, their distribution. And I ask these 4 questions. One is on their foraging patterns. How do they behave? How do they forage? How do they share the same resource in the forest? Another question that I'm asking is on how do different birds defend their territory? How well do they defend their territory from intruders? The third question I'm asking is just looking at the different vegetation types found in Fiji, the different habitats, and which one of these habitats are most preferred by these endemic species of birds. And the last question I'm asking is, well, it's not actually a question, it's just documenting traditional knowledge of birds in some of the traditional or local communities in Fiji.
So we were involved in rapid biodiversity assessment, and we had groups of students doing bird surveys and counting all of the birds in the forests of Fiji. Other students were involved in plant surveys, invertebrate surveys, bat surveys. So we really were sampling the biodiversity in the woodlands of Fiji.
So one of the interesting groups of birds that I'm working on are the honeyeaters. These are the birds that depend on the flowers, on the nectar for their survival. There are 3 species of honeyeaters that are found on Viti Levu Island. The orange-breasted honeyeater, the Fiji wattle honeyeater, and the giant forest honeyeater. And they are all endemic, only found in Fiji, and they are all forest bird species. One of the questions was with the foraging behavior is how are they able to coexist or to survive together? For the island of Viti Levu, they actually show resource partitioning. In a forest habitat, our data reveal that the orange-breasted Masomela actually feeds more on the lower canopy level, about 5 to 7 meters above the ground, and on the edge of the forest and sometimes in the open areas. The wattle honeyeater is more of a mid-level canopy feeder, but the giant forest honeyeater feeds on the main top canopy and the emergent tree level. So that's something new that we've managed to discover from these studies.
We discovered a range of behavioral patterns in the woodland birds of Fiji that are unknown to science, and that's always exciting. And they will be published as lead author, a Fijian, Alivereti Naikatini, who we had the great honor of working with. He mentored our students and will be the lead author on the publications resulting from the research.
Professionals who are working with him say that he's one of the best naturalists in the Pacific, and they're using the health of bird songs to measure the health of the ecosystem, and his work in Fiji can be then transported across the whole of the Pacific. And so many of the Commonwealth nations are small islands, both in the Pacific and in the Caribbean, and with climate change and the rising oceans, you know, we're having to work harder to help these smaller nations. It's one of the things that I love about the Commonwealth, in that, like our branches, every country at the Commonwealth has an equal vote. The UK, Canada, Australia, Fiji, Nauru, Barbados. And that's why more countries are starting to ask to join the Commonwealth that have never been part of the British Empire. Having somebody who looks at you as an equal and gives you an equal voice at the table, I think is a hopeful sign for the future.
We're on the track of learning about the behavior of Fiji's birds for the first time in a systematic way. But the other really special insight was that the woodland forests of Fiji harbor a very intact endemic forest community. Half the birds in Fiji are endemic. That means they occur only in Fiji. And when you go to a forest remnant, then you will find that intact community, generally speaking.
Traditional knowledge for Fiji, we've always taken it for granted that it's still there. We still have it. But with the modern trend of education, technology, how things are going, we are not really sure, because I believe most of this knowledge is actually eroding away from society. With my research, one of the areas I want to look into is to documenting traditional knowledge on birds that some of these local communities have, the traditional names, how are the birds important to them as totems, or even as they use it for their traditional calendars, for farming, for fishing, or even if they are part of their dances and songs.
I'm Beth Reid. I currently work for Parks and Wildlife based at Cleveland Conservation Park and did my honours thesis at Flinders University. I first got involved in the QCC project when I was studying at Flinders during my undergraduate. I got New Colombo Mobility Scholarship to go and study birds in Fiji with Sonia Kleindorfer, and through that got to conduct research in a QCC forest, and through that have done my honours thesis. I identify as Aboriginal Australian, so getting that opportunity to go and study and learn with other First Nations people and get immersed within their culture, and that transfer of knowledge and understanding of the differences in different countries and different regions and how we can work together and find common ground.
One of the most positive outcomes for everyone involved was the cross-cultural exchange. And in this partnership, this Commonwealth partnership, learning about Fijian culture and exchanging Australian culture with our Fijian partners was really meaningful. And it, on the one hand, showed how different our backgrounds are, and yet we're united by a concern for the planet and for forests. And so, being able to experience the warmth and the diversity in a cultural setting as well was really beautiful. One of the forests that we were working in Fiji, Doluisuva, was launched as a Queen Commonwealth Canopy forest in 2018, and we then returned to Australia and put in a petition to nominate for Cleveland Wildlife Park to also become a member of the Queen Commonwealth Canopy, and this was successful. And so that's an example where as an individual, you can be inspired by an experience in one country and transport that experience to another country and create something that is much bigger than a single person or a single place.
Cleveland has just been accepted as a QCC forest, so it's really exciting to have been involved in the research and work in Fiji to promote and learn, gain new knowledge about the forest and the biodiversity there, to come back and now be working in a QCC forest in Australia.
A local forest will have regional and international impact. And so by working together, we can both motivate ourselves as individuals, but also achieve the best outcome for ecosystem services provided by forests, because we do need that connectivity and those ecosystem services to sustain life on planet Earth.